I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. In our test piece, I want to take these flat spots here and convert them to points. Now that roughly corresponds to this file, but it's much larger. I've been asked several times to make photomicrographs of a file. Trying to make photomicrographs of a file with the equipment that I have is terribly difficult. It's blurry. It's a small area. It's difficult to discern what's happening on a very small scale. So instead of going micro, I went macro. We're going to work with a much larger sample, but the activity is the same. The acid is going to eat every surface of this that is in contact with acid. And while it's doing that, it's going to sharpen this surface right here. But the big thing I'm looking for with this test is not whether I've made the parts chemically clean or not, but whether I've sharpened the edges. Now if you look at this piece of rolled thread, which is off the parent chunk that all these came off of, and it's nothing exotic, it was just a piece of threaded rod that I had laying around that was of a large enough diameter to give me an effective test. If you look at the edges, all the edges are flattened. They're not sharp. Risk my fingers here for a minute. Really, the tips of them are almost rounded. By the time this stuff has gone through the acid and reduced in size this much, that is actually quite sharp. That'll kind of polish off the edge. This will actually cut a groove, and you can see that it's making sawdust, because the edges of the teeth are sharp. Now this is going back in the acid bath, so I want to make sure I've got all that sawdust cleaned off of it. Don't want to mess up my test too much. That kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing with the teeth. We're making them pointed. And I can feel it with my fingers. If you could reach through the camera and grab a hold of this piece of steel, you recognize the sharpness. Where it really starts to make a difference is where I look at the flat spot that I filed into it. That's the flat spot right there. Now I went through and did a whole lot of measuring. We won't bore you with a bunch of numbers, but it works out to about a 14 thousandths difference in diameter between S1 and the original piece. S1 was the first sample that I cut. It laid in the olive jar in the straight acid. The other one laid in the tray in the straight acid. So they were both in straight acid, but S1 was a little bit longer than S2. By using a pair of mics, I was able to measure the outside diameter of the thread, or the pitch, and compare it to the outside diameter of the piece after acid etching. So that's a nice slip fit on the part, and then you put it over the top of this and you can see that these are obviously a lot smaller. Well, that's what these numbers display also. Like I said, on average they're about 14 thousandths smaller between S1, which is this one. That's the one that's been in acid the longest. and this is the untouched part. Well, untouched. It's an old junk piece of thread. Same thing with S2, which has been in the acid about 5 hours less. It's bigger than S1. Kind of stands to reason. The longer it's in the acid, the more it's going to be etched, the more it's going to shrink in diameter. Then if I use these micrometers, which are designed to go down in and measure the bottom of the thread, that's about 620. And as if I go along here, I'm pretty close to 620. We could record the dimensions, but they're going to be fairly close. It's actually more consistent on the bottom than it is on the end of the threads, because the bottom is the die actually working on the part. The pitch of the thread is how much metal extruded up out of the part while it was being rolled in the die to put the threads on it. So this is going to vary. The bottom of the pitch is not going to vary as much. Now we'll look at S1. I have to look at the ends of them because they're really very hard to tell apart without it. I stamped the numbers in the ends so that I could tell. Okay, we were at 620 on the untouched part, and you can see that we're obviously looser. And as we go down the part, we're staying pretty consistent. 607. The minimum diameter being 620 on the thread of an untouched part. We end up with a difference of about 12 thousandths. That's how we end up with this thread pitch being sharper on the edges than it is before acid etching. Because this diameter, where I filed it, has shrunk and the flat spot has been reduced. The pitch diameter is reduced, the gullet diameter is reduced, and the edge is sharper. Now I'm going to put it back in the acid, and I'm going to check and see if I can get this flat spot here to totally disappear. Now one thing that I've noticed, this S1 and S2, as I'm etching the thread, that's etching too. So by the time I got down to this point, I had to restrike these numbers because they were just about unlegible. So we'll put this back in the bath and let it soak a while, and we'll see what happens. This one's going to stay down here on the bench. This one is in the vinegar. This diameter is shrinking, but not anywhere near as dramatically as the others. So that's where we're at. We'll go out and start the test again. If you have any suggestions for new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.